When I tell people that my mother tricked me into becoming more feminine, they usually imagine something cruel, some embarrassing scheme built out of pink dresses and locked doors. But that isn't what happened, not really. I was 23 when it began, old enough to make every decision for myself and stubborn enough to believe I had already made all the important ones. At the time, I was living at home again after college because my first job had disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. I told everyone I was saving money, which was true, but I left out the part about how lost I felt. Every morning I woke up in the same small bedroom I had grown up in, stared at the same faded posters on the wall, and put on the same dark jeans, gray hoodie, and worn sneakers. My whole life had become a uniform designed to make me invisible. I wasn't unhappy exactly. That would have been easier to explain. I was just tired of feeling like I was playing the part of someone named Daniel without ever learning what Daniel actually wanted. My mom noticed before I did. Moms notice things like that. She noticed I stopped meeting friends after work. She noticed I avoided mirrors unless I was shaving. She noticed I wore oversized clothes even in the summer. She noticed I had started speaking in short sentences, as if every extra word cost something. But she didn't confront me. That was the strange part. My mother had always been direct. When I was younger, she was the kind of person who could look at a messy room, point at a pile of clothes, and make me feel like the entire future of civilization depended on whether I picked up my socks. Yet when I became an adult and started disappearing inside myself, she became careful. She waited. She watched. And then, one rainy Thursday evening in October, she made her move. I came home soaked from the bus stop, dropped my backpack beside the kitchen table, and found an envelope waiting beside my dinner plate. It had my name written on the front in my mother's handwriting. No explanation. No warning. Just Daniel. I looked toward the living room, but she was sitting on the couch with a book in her lap, pretending not to watch me. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," she said without looking up. Inside was a gift certificate for a local salon called Lila and Company. There was a handwritten note underneath it. "For whatever version of yourself needs a little care." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. "Mom, I don't need a salon." "Then don't go," she said. "It's yours. Why would you buy me this?" She finally looked at me, and I remember the expression on her face because it was not teasing, not judgmental, not even overly concerned. It was simply gentle. "Because you haven't done one nice thing for yourself in months." I wanted to throw the envelope away. I wanted to say something sarcastic, something sharp enough to push away the strange warmth I felt rising in my chest. Instead, I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. "Thanks," I muttered. "You're welcome," she said, then returned to her book. For 3 days, I carried that salon certificate around in my backpack. I told myself I would never use it. I imagined walking into the place and being greeted by women who would immediately know I didn't belong there. I imagined getting some overly styled haircut and coming home looking ridiculous. I imagined my friends laughing if they found out. But underneath all of that was another thought, quieter and more dangerous. What if I liked it? That was the thought I couldn't shake. I had always been curious about things I pretended not to notice. The way my cousin transformed when she put on mascara for a wedding. The way women in movies seem to use clothing not just to cover themselves, but to communicate something before they said a word. The way certain fabrics looked soft enough to make a person feel different simply by touching them. I had never allowed myself to think too long about any of it. Curiosity felt like a door I was not supposed to open. So, naturally, I opened it. The salon was small, bright, and smelled like citrus shampoo. There were plants in the windows and framed sketches of hairstyles on the walls. I stood outside for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the door, before a woman inside noticed me and waved. I had no choice then. I walked in. "Hi," she said. "You must be Daniel." "I'm Lila." My mother had apparently booked the appointment already. That was the first part of the trick. I should have been annoyed, but instead I felt oddly relieved that I didn't have to explain why I was there. Lila was probably in her late 40s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and the calm confidence of someone who had heard every kind of insecurity a person could carry into a salon. She didn't ask whether I wanted to look masculine or feminine. She didn't ask whether I was trying to reinvent myself. She simply asked, "How do you want to feel when you leave?" It was such an unexpected question that I froze. No one had asked me that in a long time. People asked what I wanted to do, where I wanted to work, what my plans were. But how did I want to feel? "I don't know," I finally said. Lila smiled. "That's a perfectly good place to start." She washed my hair, trimmed it, shaped it, and softened the edges around my face. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I couldn't explain away. But when she turned the chair toward the mirror, I barely recognized the person looking back at me. My hair fell differently. My face looked less tired. My eyes looked bigger somehow. I stared at my reflection for a long time. Lila stood behind me, waiting. "You look surprised," she said. I stopped. The word beautiful almost came out, but I swallowed it. "Different," I said. "Different can be good," she replied. On the ride home, I kept checking my reflection in the dark bus window. At first I did it secretly when no one was looking. Then I stopped pretending. I watched the city lights pass over my face and wondered why I had spent years trying so hard not to be seen. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. She looked up, took one glance at me, and smiled. Not a huge smile. Not one that said, "I told you so." Just a little smile, almost proud. "It suits you," she said. "It's only a haircut," I answered. "Of course it is," she said. But I could tell she knew it wasn't only a haircut. That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror longer than I had in years. I brushed my hair one way, then another. I imagined it longer. I imagined it softer. I imagined wearing something other than the same shapeless clothes I had hidden inside since high school. Then I got scared by my own thoughts and went to sleep. For the next few weeks, my mother did not mention the salon again. That was her second trick. She knew when not to push. But tiny changes started appearing around the house. A new conditioner in the bathroom that smelled faintly like jasmine. A skincare set left beside the sink with a note that read, "Anyone can use moisturizer." A catalog on the kitchen counter for a department store, open to a page of winter clothes. I knew she was doing it on purpose. I also knew she was making it easy for me to ignore if I wanted to. That was what made it impossible to hate her for it. The first time I used the conditioner, I told myself it was because mine had run out. The first time I used the moisturizer, I told myself my skin was dry. The first time I looked through the catalog, I told myself I was only checking prices. But the truth was that every small permission felt like a thread being pulled loose from a knot I had tied around myself years ago. One Saturday morning, my mother knocked on my door. "I need your help," she said. "With what?" I asked. "Shopping." I groaned. "Mom, I'm serious. I need to find something to wear for Aunt Maria's retirement dinner, and I hate trying things on alone." "Why do you need me?" "Because you have eyes." That was how she got me into the department store. I followed her through aisles filled with coats, sweaters, shoes, scarves, and polished mannequins that somehow always looked more confident than real people. At first, I stayed close behind her, hands in my pockets, pretending I was there only as an unwilling assistant. But as she looked through clothing racks, I found myself touching fabrics when I thought no one was watching. A deep green blouse, a cream-colored cardigan, a soft black skirt that moved like water when I brushed my fingers against it. My mother noticed, of course. She noticed everything. She held up a burgundy sweater and looked at me. "This color would look good on you," she said. I stared at her. "That's a women's sweater." "It's a sweater," she replied. "It does not know who is wearing it." I laughed nervously. People would know. People know less than you think. And the people who care about you will care about you either way. I looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm not saying I want to wear it. I'm not saying you do." She put it back on the rack. "I'm simply saying it would look good on you." We moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later, while my mom was in the fitting room, I wandered into another section and saw a display of long cardigans. One was charcoal gray, one was navy, one was pale lavender. The lavender one was not bright or childish. It was muted, almost smoky, and it looked impossibly soft. I picked it up. My hands trembled. I kept expecting someone to appear beside me and ask what I thought I was doing. No one did. I held it against myself in front of a mirror. It reached almost to my knees. It made my face look warmer. For 1 second, I saw a version of myself that seemed lighter, gentler, more alive. Then I heard my mother's voice behind me.
"Try it on," she said.
I spun around. "I'm not. You don't have to buy it," she said. "You don't have to show anyone. But trying something on is not a contract." My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure everyone in the store could hear it. What if someone sees? Then they see someone trying on a cardigan. In the women's section, my mother sighed, not impatiently, but sadly. "Daniel, do you know how many things you have refused to do because you're afraid someone might look at you for 3 seconds?" I didn't answer. "You deserve better than that," she said. Then she held out the cardigan. "If you want to try it on, I'll stand outside the fitting room door. If you don't, we can leave right now and never mention it again." I took the cardigan. I wish I could say it was a brave moment, that I walked into the fitting room with my head held high and transformed under the warm overhead lights. It wasn't like that. I was shaking. I locked the door, hung my hoodie on the hook, and stared at myself in the mirror, wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans. Then I pulled the cardigan on. The fabric fell over my shoulders. It was soft. That was the first thing I noticed. It was so soft that I almost cried, which felt absurd. I turned sideways. The shape of it was different from anything I owned. It did not hide me under a block of dark fabric. It moved around me. It suggested that I had a body instead of a problem to conceal. I stayed in that fitting room for 15 minutes. My mom never knocked. She just waited. When I finally stepped outside, I expected her to laugh or say something dramatic. Instead, she looked at me quietly, and her eyes filled with tears. "You look comfortable," she said. That was when I started crying too. Not loudly, not like a movie, just silent tears I couldn't stop. "I don't know what I'm doing," I whispered. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "You only have to be honest. We bought the cardigan." I told the cashier it was a gift for someone. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it was mine still felt too dangerous. At home, I hid it in the back of my closet behind old boxes. For 3 days, I did not touch it. On the 4th night, everyone was asleep, and I took it out. I put it on over my pajamas and sat on my bed in the dark. I remember running my hand down the sleeve and feeling an ache in my chest. I thought about every time I had looked at something feminine and told myself I was just curious. Every time I had wished my hair were longer. Every time I had envied the freedom other people seemed to have in how they looked, moved, spoke, laughed, and took up space. I had spent so much energy trying to be what I thought a son was supposed to be that I had never stopped to ask what kind of person I was allowed to become. The next morning, my mother found me in the kitchen wearing the cardigan. I had forgotten I still had it on. I was making coffee, half asleep, when she walked in. I froze. She looked at me, then at the cardigan, then back at me. "Good morning," she said. I wanted to run upstairs and change. Instead, I said, "Do I look stupid?" "No," she said immediately. "You look like you." That answer followed me for days. "You look like you." What did that even mean? I wasn't sure I knew. The cardigan became a secret ritual. I wore it at home, usually at night. Soon I started using the conditioner regularly. I bought a lip balm with a slight tint, then panicked and threw it in a drawer, then dug it out again the next day. I began paying attention to my face in the mirror, not with disgust but curiosity. I noticed my eyebrows were thicker than I liked. I noticed my skin looked better when I slept. I noticed that when I smiled without forcing it, I looked younger. My mother said nothing unless I brought it up. That was what kept me from shutting down. She never acted as if she knew who I was better than I did. She only kept leaving the door open. Then came the evening, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through videos on my phone, when an advertisement appeared for a makeup tutorial. I almost swiped past it, but the woman in the video had a face shape vaguely similar to mine. She was explaining how small changes could make someone feel more confident. I watched the whole thing. Then another. Then another. My mother came in and placed a bowl of popcorn beside me. She glanced at the phone screen, but didn't comment. Finally, I said, "Do you think makeup would look weird on me?" She sat down across from me. "Do you want the honest answer?" "Yes. I think it would look like makeup on you. Sometimes you might love it. Sometimes you might hate it. But it would not make you weird." I stared at my phone. What if I don't just want it to look like makeup on me? Her expression softened. "Then what do you want?" I could not say it. The words were too large. I felt them gathering behind my teeth. I want to look feminine. I want people to see something in me that I can barely admit to myself. I want to stop feeling like I'm borrowing my own life. But I was scared. So I said, "I don't know." My mother nodded. "That's okay." Then she got up, opened a drawer, and placed a small makeup bag on the table. "I bought this years ago," she said, "for emergencies. And by emergencies, I mean weddings, bad lighting, and days when I wanted to look less exhausted." I looked at the bag. "You're letting me use your makeup?" "I am offering. You can say no." I opened it. There were brushes, a compact powder, mascara, concealer, a neutral eyeshadow palette, and a lipstick that looked far too red. "I don't know how," I said. "Neither did I the first time." She sat beside me. "We can learn." That night, my mother taught me how to use concealer under my eyes, how to blend it without leaving harsh lines, how to shape my brows gently, how to apply mascara without poking myself in the eye. We laughed when I made mistakes. We wiped things off and tried again. The whole time, she kept asking, "Is this okay? Do you want to stop? Do you want to try a little more?" Nobody had ever made something so frightening feel so safe. When we were done, I looked in the mirror and felt the room tilt. The changes were subtle. My skin looked smoother. My eyes looked brighter. My brows had a softer shape. But the effect was overwhelming. The person in the mirror did not look like a stranger. That was the terrifying part. She looked familiar. Not entirely. Not yet. But familiar enough to make my throat close. "Mom," I said, and my voice broke. "I think I've been hiding." She put her hand over mine. "Then maybe it's time to let yourself be found." I wish the story became easy after that. It didn't. For every moment of relief, there was a moment of fear. I started experimenting with clothing at home, first with soft sweaters and slimmer jeans, then with tops from the women's section that were plain enough to pass without questions. My mother helped me order a few items online, and every package felt like both a gift and a threat. I would wait until the mail came, rush upstairs with the box, lock my bedroom door, and try on each piece in front of the mirror. Sometimes I felt wonderful. Sometimes I felt ridiculous. Sometimes I felt nothing at all, which frightened me in a different way. I kept expecting a lightning bolt certainty, some moment when I would know exactly who I was and what I should do. Instead, I got dozens of small moments. The way I smiled when I wore a fitted blouse under my cardigan. The way I felt calmer after caring for my hair. The way my shoulders relaxed when I stopped forcing my voice deeper than it naturally wanted to be. The way I began to imagine a future rather than simply endure the present. My mom never called me a daughter. She never suggested a name. She never told me I was transgender, feminine, gender fluid, or anything else. She had learned the hard way. She later told me that labels could be gifts, but they could also become cages if someone handed them to you before you were ready. So she let me explore. She let me be confused. She let me change my mind. But I began to notice the way she looked at me when I was happy. It was different from the way she looked at me when I was pretending. She knew. Maybe she did not know the exact words yet, but she knew I was moving towards something true. The real suspense entered my life in the form of my father. My parents had divorced years earlier, and Dad lived 2 towns away. He visited occasionally, usually for dinner or to help with something around the house. He was not a bad man. That would have made things simpler. He was hardworking, quiet, traditional, and deeply uncomfortable with emotions he could not fix using a toolbox. He loved me, I knew that. But he had always seemed proud of the version of me that required the least explanation. His son who liked video games, wore hoodies, and never caused a scene. I was terrified of what would happen if he saw me changing. So I kept my experiments hidden whenever I knew he was coming over. I would tuck the feminine clothes away, wipe off any makeup, pull on my old hoodie, and become Daniel the version everyone recognized. Every time I did it, I felt like I was erasing myself. The worst part was that I was getting good at it. One Sunday afternoon, Dad showed up unexpectedly. I was home alone because Mom had gone to the grocery store. I had spent the morning trying on a new outfit, black high-waisted pants, a soft cream blouse, and the lavender cardigan that had started everything. My hair had grown longer by then, brushing my jawline. I had lightly shaped my brows and used tinted lip balm. I had been sitting by the window, listening to music and feeling almost peaceful when the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a delivery. I opened the door without thinking. Dad stood there with a bag of takeout in one hand. For a second, neither of us moved. His eyes traveled from my hair to my blouse to the cardigan. I watched confusion turn into recognition, then shock, then something I could not read. "Daniel," he said. My body went cold. "Hi, Dad." He did not step inside. "What are you wearing?" The question was not angry, but it wasn't gentle either. It carried the weight of 100 things neither of us had ever discussed. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was a costume, a joke, laundry, anything. But something inside me was tired of running. "Clothes," I said. His face tightened. "Don't be smart with me." "I'm not trying to be." "Then explain." I looked past him at the driveway, at the gray afternoon sky, at the neighbor walking her dog, without paying us any attention. The world was continuing as if my entire life had not just split open. "I'm trying to figure myself out," I said. "This is part of it." Dad set the takeout bag down on the porch. "Your mother knows about this?" I nodded. He let out a slow breath and looked away. That was when I knew the conversation would not go well. "Of course she does," he said. "Dad, no. I need a minute." He picked up the bag, walked back to his car, and drove away. I stood in the doorway for several minutes after he left. I could not breathe properly. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my phone twice when I tried to call Mom. When she answered, I could barely speak. "He saw me," I said. "Your dad." He came over. I opened the door. I didn't think. "Are you okay?" That question made me cry. "I don't know." She came home immediately. When she found me sitting on the floor of my bedroom with a cardigan crumpled in my hands, she did not tell me it would all be fine. She did not tell me Dad would understand. She just sat beside me. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "But it hurts," I whispered. "I know." "What if he hates me?" "Then that will be his failure, not yours." I looked at her. "What if I hate me?" Her face broke then. She reached over and pulled me into a hug. "You have spent so long trying to become someone you could tolerate," she said. "Maybe it is time to give yourself the chance to become someone you can love." That night, I did not sleep. I kept replaying Dad's expression. I kept thinking of every cruel story I had heard, every joke people made, every warning I had absorbed without realizing it. By morning, I had convinced myself I should stop. I could put everything away. I could cut my hair, throw out the clothes, become ordinary again. It would be easier. It would hurt less. I went downstairs with a trash bag in my hand. My mother saw it immediately. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Cleaning out my closet." "At 7 in the morning?" "I'm done," I said. This was stupid. What was stupid? All of it. I could not look at her. "I'm not doing this anymore." She walked over and gently took the trash bag from my hand. "You can choose to stop exploring," she said. "But don't make that choice because someone looked at you with confusion." "He's my dad." "Yes." "He thinks I'm broken." "You do not know that." "I know him." "You know the version of him that has never had to confront this." I laughed bitterly. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said. "It is supposed to remind you that people can surprise you." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. For a week, I stopped wearing anything feminine. I returned to hoodies and loose jeans. I ignored the skincare products. I stopped brushing my hair carefully. I felt miserable, but I told myself misery was safer than disappointment. Then one evening my phone rang. It was Dad. I stared at his name until the call nearly went to voicemail. Finally, I answered. "Hello." "Hey," he said. His voice sounded tired. "Can we talk?" About what? You know about what? I considered hanging up. Instead, I said, I don't know if I can. There was a long silence. I handled that badly, he said. The words were so unexpected that I almost dropped the phone. You left, I said. I know. You looked at me like my voice failed. Like I didn't know you, he finished quietly. I'm sorry. I sat on the edge of my bed. Do you? Do I know you? Maybe not as well as I thought I did. He paused. But I want to. I did not forgive him instantly. Real life does not work that way. We talked for less than 10 minutes that night. He asked whether I was safe. He asked whether anyone was pressuring me. I told him no. I told him Mom had not forced anything, that she had only given me room to figure things out. He was quiet for a while after that. Then, he said something I would remember forever. I was scared she was changing you, he admitted. But maybe we're changing because you needed to. I closed my eyes. Maybe. I don't understand it, he said. But I don't want fear to make me lose you. That was not a perfect answer. It was not a movie speech. It was a beginning. And beginnings were all I had learned to ask for. After that call, I slowly began again. Not because Dad approved, not because Mom encouraged me, not because I had reached some final conclusion, but because I realized I could not go back to pretending. Pretending had become more painful than fear. I started letting my hair grow. I learned how to care for it properly, how to dry it without making it frizz, how to style it in ways that made me feel soft rather than hidden. I began visiting Lila at the salon every 6 weeks. At first, I told her I was just maintaining the cut. Eventually, I told her the truth. I think I want to look more feminine, I said, barely above a whisper. Lila nodded as if I had said I wanted to try a new shampoo. Okay, she replied. What does feminine mean to you? I thought about it. Not fake, I said. Not like I'm wearing a costume. Good answer, she said. Then we will build toward what feels natural to you. She taught me that transformation was not a single reveal. It was a process of choices. A softer haircut, better posture, skincare, clothes that fit, a little color, a little confidence. None of those things made me less real. They made it easier for the real parts of me to come forward. I began going out in more expressive clothes. First, only to places where no one knew me. A bookstore in the next town. A coffee shop near the university. A small art market on Saturday mornings. I wore simple things. Fitted pants, long cardigans, neutral tops, clean shoes, a little makeup. The first time a cashier called me, ma'am, she corrected herself immediately when she saw my startled expression. Sorry, she said. No, it's okay, I replied. And it was. More than okay. I walked out of that store, holding a cup of coffee and trying not to cry. It was such a tiny moment, a mistake made by a stranger, but it gave me a glimpse of something I had never allowed myself to imagine. I began asking myself questions I had avoided for years. Did I want to be seen as feminine because I liked the clothes? Because I liked the freedom? Because I liked the idea of being a woman? Did I feel like a man who wanted to express himself differently? Or did I feel like someone who had been called a man for so long that I had learned to survive inside the word? I did not have easy answers. Sometimes I felt certain. Other times I felt afraid I was inventing a problem because I was lost in other parts of my life. But every time I returned to the old version of myself, I felt smaller. Every time I allowed myself to be softer, more expressive, more visibly feminine, I felt like I could breathe. My mother encouraged me to see a therapist, not because she thought something was wrong with me, but because she knew I needed a place where I could say everything without worrying about hurting someone else's feelings. The therapist was named Dr. Rowan, and on my first visit I sat in the waiting room convinced I would leave before my appointment started. I almost did, but then she opened the door, smiled, and said, "You can come in whenever you're ready." I spent the first session talking about work. The second session, I talked about my parents' divorce. The third session, I finally said, "I think I might not be who everyone thinks I am." Dr. Rowan leaned forward slightly. "Who do you think you might be?" I stared at the floor. "I don't know." "Then we can start there." Over the months that followed, she helped me understand that identity was not an exam I had to pass. I did not need proof. I did not need childhood photographs of myself in dresses, or a dramatic story explaining every feeling I had ever had. I only had to pay attention to what made me feel whole. She asked me to imagine myself 10 years in the future. In one version, I was still living as Daniel, still wearing clothes that hid me, still avoiding mirrors, still trying to be unremarkable. In the other version, I had allowed myself to grow into something uncertain, but honest. Which future feels more frightening? She asked. I expected the answer to be the second one. But it wasn't. The first future terrified me more. That was when I started using a different name in private. I did not choose it quickly. For weeks, I wrote possibilities in a notebook. I tried names in my head while walking to work. I whispered them in front of the mirror. Some sounded beautiful but wrong. Some sounded too dramatic. Some sounded like they belonged to someone else. Then one night, I wrote the name Elena. I stared at it for a long time. Elena. It felt gentle. It felt familiar in a way I could not explain. I said it out loud. My name is Elena. My voice shook. I said it again. My name is Elena. This time, I cried. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time, I felt like I had introduced myself to someone I had been waiting to meet. I told my mom the next morning. We were standing in the kitchen, both holding coffee mugs. I think I have a name, I said. She looked at me carefully. Okay. Elena. She repeated it softly. Elena. Then she smiled through tears. It's lovely. I was afraid she would make it too big, but she didn't. She just asked, would you like me to use it? I nodded. Yes. Good morning, Elena, she said. I had heard those words only once, but they changed everything. The name felt awkward at first. Every time Mom used it, I looked around as if she might be talking to someone else. But gradually, the sound settled into me. Elena. It felt like sunlight entering a room that had been closed for years. My father struggled more. He tried. That mattered. The first time he called me Elena, he said it too quickly, almost under his breath like he was afraid the name might break. But he said it. Then he apologized when he used my old name. Then he stopped apologizing quite so much because he became better at getting it right. We still had difficult conversations. He worried about how people would treat me. He worried about whether I would regret anything. He worried about things he could not name. Sometimes his concerns sounded too much like fear. Sometimes I got angry. Sometimes he got defensive. But through all of it, he kept showing up. One evening, while helping me assemble a bookshelf for my room, he said, I used to think being a parent meant teaching your kid who to be. He tightened a screw and stared at the wooden panel in front of him. Now I think it might mean learning who they are and trying not to stand in their way. I looked at him, surprised. That's a pretty good lesson. He gave a small smile. Took me long enough. The most difficult part was telling other people. Family members. Friends. Co-workers. Each one felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I started with my best friend, Marcus. We had known each other since high school, and I was terrified he would laugh. I invited him to meet me at a quiet cafe. I wore a simple black dress under a long coat with tights and ankle boots. I had spent 2 hours getting ready and nearly canceled 3 times. When he walked in, he saw me immediately. He stopped. His face changed. I stood up, hands trembling. Hi, I said. It's me. He looked at me for what felt like forever. Then he said, wow. My stomach dropped. Bad wow. No, he said quickly. Just wow. You look happy. I started crying before I could stop myself. Marcus sat down across from me, confused and worried. Did I say something wrong? No, I said, wiping my face. You said exactly the right thing. I told him everything. Not every detail, but enough. I told him my name was Elena. I told him I was exploring my gender and that I did not have every answer yet. I told him I was scared he would think I had been lying to him for years. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, You were trying to survive. That's not lying. Then he smiled and added, Also, I always thought you had better fashion sense than you pretended to. I laughed so hard that people at the next table looked over. Telling others was not always that easy. Some relatives avoided the subject. One aunt told my mother privately that she was encouraging confusion. A cousin I had once been close to stopped responding to messages. A former coworker made a cruel comment online after seeing a photo of me. Each rejection hurt. I would like to say I became immune to it, but I didn't. I still felt every loss. I still woke up some nights wondering whether life would have been easier if I had stayed hidden. But then I would look in the mirror, not always loving every part of what I saw, but recognizing myself more clearly than ever before. And I would remember that hiding had a cost too. There were also unexpected kindnesses. My Aunt Maria, the one whose retirement dinner had started our shopping trip, sent me a handwritten card after Mom told her. It said, "I may not understand every step of your journey, but I understand courage when I see it." My younger cousin asked me for makeup advice. A woman at work complimented my hair without knowing how much effort it had taken for me to let it grow. Lila introduced me to another client who had also rebuilt her life after years of pretending. Little by little, a new world formed around me. Not a perfect world, not one without risk, but a world where I could exist. The biggest turning point came almost a year after that first salon appointment. My mother invited me to go with her to a charity gala held at a local museum. It was the kind of event I would once have avoided at all costs. Formal clothes, photographs, strangers, bright rooms, people asking questions. "You don't have to go," she said. But I thought you might want to. I wanted to say no. Every nervous instinct in me screamed no. But another voice, the one that had grown stronger with every small choice, said yes. We spent weeks preparing. Mom helped me choose an outfit, but she made sure every decision was mine. I chose a midnight blue dress that was elegant without feeling like a costume. It had long sleeves, a simple neckline, and a skirt that flowed when I walked. I chose low heels because I was not ready to risk falling in front of a room full of people. I chose a small silver necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. My mom offered it to me the night before the gala. "She would have wanted you to have something that made you feel brave," she said. I held the necklace in my palm for a long time. "Do you think she would have understood?" I asked. My grandmother had died when I was 16, long before any of this. Mom looked out the window. She understood more than people gave her credit for. On the night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the dress, with my hair styled in soft waves, my makeup subtle but intentional, and the silver necklace resting against my skin. I looked beautiful. I can say that now. At the time, I could barely breathe. I kept staring at my reflection, waiting for the fear to erase everything. My mother stood behind me and placed her hands on my shoulders. "You don't have to prove anything tonight," she said. "You are allowed to simply be there." "What if people stare?" I asked. "Some may," she said honestly, "but they will not get to decide who you are." We arrived at the museum just after sunset. Lights glowed through the tall glass windows. People in formal clothes moved across the entrance hall, carrying glasses of sparkling water and talking in small circles. For a moment, I stood outside with my hand on the car door, unable to move. "We can leave," Mom said. "No," I replied, though my voice shook. "I want to go in." The first few minutes were terrible. I felt like everyone could see the fear in me. I imagined every glance was judgment. I held Mom's arm too tightly. But then something happened. An older woman approached us, complimented my dress, and asked where we found it. I told her. She smiled and moved on. Then one of Mom's friends greeted me by my name. "Elena, you look lovely," she said. Not Daniel. Not a pause. Not confusion. Elena. I smiled. A real smile. The room did not collapse. No one pointed. No one laughed. I began to relax. I walked through the gallery. I spoke to people. I even stood in a photograph beside my mother. When the photographer asked us to move closer together, Mom put her arm around my waist, and I realized she was crying. "Mom," I whispered, "you'll ruin your makeup." She laughed through the tears. "Worth it." Later that evening, as we stood near a large painting of a storm over the sea, she said, "Do you remember the first note I left you?" I nodded. For whatever version of yourself needs a little care. I was afraid you'd be angry at me, she said. I was. I know. Why did you do it? She looked at the painting for a moment before answering. Because I could see you disappearing. And because when you were little, you used to come to me whenever something scared you. I thought maybe you still needed to know the door was open. I swallowed hard. You did trick me. She smiled. A little. You booked the salon appointment without asking. I did. You left the conditioner out. Guilty. You took me shopping on purpose. Absolutely. I looked down at my dress, at my hands, at the silver necklace resting against my chest. What if I had never gone? Then I would have kept loving you, she said. What if I had decided none of this was for me? Then I would have kept loving you. What if I change again? She turned toward me. Elena, you are allowed to change for the rest of your life. That is not a betrayal of who you were. That is what being alive means. I thought about that for a long time. The truth was, my transformation had not happened because my mother wanted a daughter. It had not happened because of a haircut, a cardigan, a tube of mascara, or a dress. It had happened because someone saw me struggling and offered me permission to ask questions I had been too afraid to ask. She did not build a new person out of me. She helped me uncover the person who had been there, quietly waiting, beneath years of fear. Months later, I moved into my own apartment. It was small, with creaky floors and too little closet space, but it was mine. The first thing I did was hang a full-length mirror near the bedroom window. The second thing I did was arrange my clothes by color, something I once would have mocked as unnecessary. There were still hoodies in my closet. There were still jeans. There were days when I wore no makeup and days when I felt uncertain. I did not become a different person overnight, and I did not become fearless. But I became honest. I started using Elena everywhere that felt safe. I built a new wardrobe slowly, choosing pieces that made me feel confident instead of trying to imitate anyone else. I found friends who knew me as Elena from the beginning, and I learned what it felt like not to explain every part of myself before being accepted. I kept seeing Dr. Rowan. I kept visiting Lila. I kept calling Mom whenever I had a bad day, which was more often than I liked to admit. And sometimes, when I was overwhelmed, I would open my closet and touch the lavender cardigan. It was still there, older now, slightly worn at the sleeves, but it remained the most important piece of clothing I owned. It reminded me of the person I had been in that fitting room, frightened, uncertain, standing in front of a mirror, waiting for someone to tell me whether I was allowed to exist. I no longer needed anyone's permission in the same way, but I would always be grateful that my mother had offered it when I did. The last time Dad visited my apartment, he brought over a toolbox because one of my cabinet doors was loose. He fixed it in 10 minutes, then stood in my kitchen looking around at the soft colors, the plants by the window, the framed photo of Mom and me from the gala. "This place suits you," he said. I smiled. "You think so?" "Yeah." He hesitated. "You seem lighter." I looked at him. "I am." He nodded slowly, as if he had been carrying that answer around for a long time. "Good," he said. "That's all I ever wanted." After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street. I thought about the fear I had felt when he first saw me in that cream blouse and lavender cardigan. I thought about how close I had come to throwing everything away. I thought about the version of me who believed being accepted was the same thing as being known. I understood now that some people would never understand me, and some people would try but fail, and some people would surprise me with a kindness I had not expected. But the most important acceptance had to come from inside. It had to come from the moment I looked in the mirror and stopped asking whether I looked right for everyone else. It had to come from the moment I saw Elena looking back and chose not to turn away. So yes, if you want the dramatic version, you can say my mom tricked her son into feminizing himself. You can say she used a salon certificate, a lavender cardigan, a secret makeup bag, and 1,000 tiny acts of patience to lead me down a path I had been too scared to walk alone. But the truth is more complicated and more beautiful. She did not trick me into becoming someone else. She tricked me into believing I deserved to find out